Billions watched as an unarmed man was executed live. One shot, silence, blood. But that wasn't the end. What came next stunned the entire galaxy. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Billions watched as an unarmed man was executed live. One shot, silence, blood. But that wasn't the end. What came next stunned the entire galaxy. But first, let's go back to the beginning. For centuries, Earth had clawed its way up from the shadows of irrelevance, grit in its lungs, blood on its hands, and fire in its throat. The Stellar Accord watched with patronizing curiosity as humans joined their councils, signed their treaties, and cautiously colonized moons with more courage than clout. To the elder empires, Earth was a species of stubborn learners, brilliant in bursts, reckless by default, and forgettable in the long view of galactic time. But on the 7th rotation of Zarnak's red sun, the illusion cracked like glass under a boot. The Varelians had always ruled from the shadows of intimidation. Towering biometallic beings, they were bred for conquest, their minds sharpened not for empathy but for efficiency. When Cars 9, a desolate moon brimming with volatile minerals, became a site of diplomatic friction, the Varelians didn't send envoys. They sent enforcers. And when resistance from local colonists proved inconvenient, they took hostages. 27, spanning 7 species, only 1 was human. Benjamin Cross, 32. No military record. Carried nothing but a portable medkit and a satchel of nutrient rations. His mission? Aid and comfort for war refugees displaced by failed negotiations. The Varelians didn't care. They saw his lack of threat as an opportunity to send a message, one the galaxy would never misinterpret. On a secure feed piped through every major communications hub in the Accord, the transmission began without warning. No opening statement, no demand, no context. The image, Benjamin, kneeling on a rusted platform under artificial lights, face bruised, hands bound, a thin line of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Behind him stood a Virelian officer, cold, rigid, and utterly unmoved. The High Marshal's voice, pre-recorded, boomed across the transmission in Standard Galactic. "Let Earth watch. Let them understand the weight of defiance." A pulse of silence, then the shot, back of the skull, point blank. The body jerked once, then crumpled forward like paper set aflame. No final words, no attempt at dignity, just execution, clinical and deliberate. Across the galaxy, news feeds froze. Leaders stood still. On Earth, billions watched in stunned silence as the feed cut to black. Within the Varelian command ship, Marshal Threxon turned to his officers and smiled, exposing rows of crystalline teeth. "They wear compassion like armor," he said. "Let us show them how easily it shatters." It wasn't just an execution. It was a statement. An act of psychological warfare meant to humiliate a species known for its moral defiance. But Threxon made one fatal error. He thought Earth's silence would mean surrender. He mistook restraint for submission. He forgot what happens when humanity feels before it fights. The footage played again in the UEC command hall, not because anyone had ordered it, but because no one dared turn it off. It looped in silence, sound stripped away, as if the absence of Benjamin Cross's voice preserved something sacred. A man of open palms and soft convictions. An aid worker who painted alien landscapes in the margins of his reports, who wrote poems about peace in the margins of bureaucratic briefs. Now, his final image, a hollowed frame collapsing under the weight of barbaric spectacle, etched itself into the minds of generals who had seen too much, and diplomats who believed they'd seen it all. Commander Julia Cross didn't weep. She stood like granite beneath the sterile lights, the sharp creases of her uniform unmarred, boots rooted into the command floor as if anything less would betray him. She didn't blink during the execution clip, didn't flinch at the blood mist, just stared, breath even, until the feed ended and the silence came crashing in like air after an explosion. Julia had led men through the sulfur storms of Mars. She'd negotiated ceasefires with zealots whose ideology didn't include the concept of mercy. But this was different. This was Benjamin, her kid brother who once begged her to teach him to fly a simulator so he could reach the stars without hurting anything. The boy who brought home injured animals and named them after philosophers, who still believed, somehow, in a galaxy that could heal. 3 days passed, not because she was broken, but because she was calculating the shape of pain, measuring what had been lost and what would now have to be given in return. When she finally spoke, her voice was so level it chilled the skin. Permission. President Delgado leaned forward, brows tight with caution. Retaliation? Julia turned her head, the movement slow, deliberate, like a soldier aiming not a weapon, but a truth. No, she said. Not retaliation. The air thinned. A response, she clarified, one that speaks the only language they understand. What filled the room wasn't fury. It was a colder thing, resolve forged in grief. She wasn't driven by vengeance. That would pass. This was a funeral turned into a declaration. A woman who had carried a flag through battle now carried a brother through memory, and she would not let his name fade into silence. The galaxy had watched a good man die. Now Julia would ensure it watched what came next because he had lived. No warships followed, no battle formations, just one ship, sleek and silent, crossing the threshold of Varelian territory like a shadow laced in light. It moved unchallenged, not because the Varelians were afraid of what it carried, but because they assumed Earth would retaliate with plasma, with fire, with the arrogance of wounded pride. They didn't understand what Earth had truly weaponized. The dreadnought's hangar bay opened. No artillery emerged, no sound, only a tide of drones, small, spherical, silently dispersing across the atmosphere of Ulcor, the Varelian capital world. They ignored military outposts. They bypassed government towers. Instead, they embedded themselves on schools, transit hubs, market centers, places where the common citizen walked, breathed, believed. And then the sky turned into a gallery. Projected across the spires of the Varelian skyline were images no intelligence network had predicted. The first was of a Varelian child, hands dipped in crimson clay, laughing beside a human girl as they built crude figurines together under the soft light of Cars 9's twin moons. Another followed, 2 peacekeepers, one human, one Varelian, embracing after saving refugees from a collapsed mine. Each image bore Benjamin Cross's distinct style, human warmth woven through alien geometry, brushstrokes that radiated empathy. Some viewers wept, others watched in silence. The High Council scrambled to shut the feeds down, but they were too late. For 12 hours the planet became a canvas, and Earth didn't paint with fire. It painted with conscience. When Julia Cross's voice finally cut through the stillness, it did so without thunder. It didn't need it. You killed a man who never carried a gun. You tried to break us with violence. You taught us that diplomacy without teeth is a lie. So here is our answer. At 0000 UTC, Earth didn't launch missiles. It launched the truth. Every major network in the Accord received full-spectrum files. Databases Earth had quietly compiled for years. Leaked transmissions of Varelian commanders laughing as prisoners begged for water. Holograms of high-ranking officials signing off on forced labor quotas. Audio clips of High Marshal Threxon referring to allies as useful cattle with delusions of dignity. The fallout was immediate. Trade networks severed. Emergency councils convened. Embassies emptied overnight. Systems once bound by fear now recoiled in collective revulsion. Protests erupted not only on Varelian colonies, but within Ulcor itself. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's own citizens saw the face of their rule and turned away. 3 days later, Threxen was dragged from his war seat by his own generals, not with vengeance, but with shame. His final press statement was a whisper lost in static. They didn't fire a shot. And that was the point. Earth didn't need to. They fired Benjamin. They fired his hope, his brush, his silence, and they brought an empire to its knees. The wind on Cars 9 was different now, softer, as if the ice fields themselves had learned to whisper, not howl. Above the central plateau, once scarred by extraction drills and the dull grind of colonial machinery, stood a solitary figure cast in bronze, not towering, not grand, but human-sized, approachable, real. Benjamin Cross, frozen mid-step, a satchel slung over one shoulder, his free hand extended forward, not in defiance, but in offering. The sculptor had captured the curve of his smile with reverent precision, modest, kind, eternally hopeful. Behind him, a curved plinth rose from the ground, engraved not with weapons or medals, but with paintings, rendered in etched relief, depictions of his work broadcast during Earth's response. Children playing under twin moons, Varelian and human hands painting side by side. A galaxy imagined not through conquest, but connection. The plaque read, "He believed in peace. They gave him death. We gave him eternity." It wasn't Earth's military might that redefined the accord. It was Benjamin's absence and the silence it left in its wake that echoed through policy halls, Senate chambers, and alien parliaments. He had no rank, no title, no mandate. Yet he had become the one thing no empire could manufacture, a moral constant, a fixed star against which all future actions would be measured. Children across dozens of systems now studied him alongside pioneers and philosophers. On distant moons, his image adorned humanitarian ships and medical outreach stations. The cross emblem, 2 open hands, 1 human, 1 alien, was now the symbol of the interspecies aid network. His journals, once filled with sketches and quiet dreams, had become required reading in diplomatic academies from Earth to Illyrian. And in whispers, never loud, always sacred, his name was invoked at moments of brink and bravery. When protesters in the Creon Republic stood unarmed before riot mechs, they painted his face on their banners. When a Darathi whistleblower exposed caste slaughter on her homeworld, she said his memory gave her courage. When rebel leaders on the fractured world of Celix negotiated peace instead of civil war, they ended their agreement with one line: "Let this be our cross." Benjamin had never asked to be remembered. He had simply shown up, with supplies, with compassion, with art. But the galaxy remembered him anyway, not for what he fought, but for what he refused to. And so, from the ruins of a single unjust death, a movement rose, not forged in flame, but in light. The kind that guides, the kind that stays, the kind that changes the stars.